Hey everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Southern Woke. I'm Kalen.
And I'm Marina. And today we are talking about some history. In our history classes growing up, we were taught about America's good old founding fathers, and we were basically taught to idolize them as if they are our heroes. But as with most things we were taught in history class, the truth is much darker. And I guess I know why they didn't tell us some of this, because we were probably too young to hear about such things. But today we're taking a deep dive into the histories of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams.
Dude, if there's anything that I learned from this, it's first of all, back in the day, like those times were freaking wild.
Oh yeah, they were
Like
ruthless.
the things that we learn about them doing in school make them seem like they just walked around in like suits all day and like made like decisions and sat around in courtrooms, but like they were wild and out back in the day. And I just can't wait for y'all
Yeah,
to hear half of that shit.
they were always drunk. Keep that in mind.
Oh yeah.
Always. So, to kick it on off with the first president himself, we have George Washington. And I feel like it's important to know some of his backstory to understand the path he took. So, his dad died when he was 11, and he spent his childhood in Virginia. And at the time that his father died, George was the oldest son left at home with like mom and the other kids. And at that time, like when a husband dies, like the oldest son in the house takes charge and they're supposed to like take care of the whole family. Well, this was a lot for George at 11 years old. And he still ended up going to school until he was 13, and he was like, I just can't take it anymore. And
Can
but
you
then
imagine
he had
trying to take
his
care of a family when you're like 11 or 13 years old? Like, I was not thinking of that at all when I was
Mhm.
11. I don't even know if I could take care of a family right now, much less when I was 11.
Exactly. Like literally their brains were so in a different world back then. But his older brother Lawrence had become a war hero because he had like moved to England. He was like in the army or whatever. And when he came back to America, he built a huge estate in Virginia and reached out to little George to come live with him. When George was 19, Lawrence got sick and the doctor prescribed him to go somewhere sunny.
I love old medicine, y'all.
I think that was the same prescription for the Stanley Hotel, like the guy Stanley. Remember, he had like tuberculosis or something, and his doctor was like, move to a place with high altitude or something. And then he moved to Colorado, and boom, he was better.
You know, they weren't that far off that line of thinking because, like, vitamin D is good for you in some way, and maybe they somehow correlated.
Let me pause for a second because Binks is like literally trying to climb up the wall. Stuck in the back. Okay. So, while Lawrence and George were in Barbados, George gets smallpox, but he recovers because I've learned throughout looking into George that he's a pretty resilient guy. But Lawrence did end up dying from tuberculosis, unfortunately.
Not enough sun.
Not enough D. That kind of thing. Well, the French had their eye on the land that is today Ohio. I don't know why that's so important, the land of Ohio. And the British Army got word that the French were camping out near the Ohio River. And George's commander told him to go scope it out. So George gets there and he sees the French tents along the river and realizes that he's outnumbered. And instead of doing anything logical, he just starts shooting shit, knowing that he is way outnumbered and that, like, that probably was gonna start some shit. And that it did. So he ended up killing 10 French soldiers and a French diplomat. And then it ended up starting a battle that started the 7-year French and Indian War. All
Wait,
because
so like
George,
George Washington, who like went on like a Rambo killing spree somehow, started the French and Indian War.
basically. All he had to do was go see how many French were out there and go tell his commander. And no, he just started shooting things.
That's what America was built off of.
Yep, that's why the Second Amendment is guns, guns, guns.
Yep.
I saw a TikTok today and it was like, what were they thinking when they numbered the amendments? Like, okay, number 1, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom, freedom, freedom. And then 2, and someone was just like, guns. Everyone can have guns. And then 3, the military cannot occupy your home or something random like that. I was
I
like,
think
dude, that does make sense. It doesn't make sense.
I feel like the whole military occupying your home thing was probably like really important back then.
I
But like
mean,
also
yeah,
imagine nowadays if like soldiers were just like sleeping in their houses all the time.
we would
It's
probably
only
be
not a
thought,
thing because
I guess it's only not a thing because of the amendment, but like, I feel like if needed, most of America would be like, yeah, the troops can take a rest in my house.
yeah, I agree. I guess
Like,
it's
if you
more
think
like if
about
you
it.
hate your government, like, and then there's like when we were still part of Britain and the British troops were like sleeping in our
Oh,
houses, like it's probably like more of that, I would guess.
yeah, you're right. I didn't look at the whole picture. It's that, like, little George went and chopped on his daddy's cherry tree. And when the dad came out and was like, George, did you chop down my cherry tree? And then George said the famous line, I cannot tell a lie. I did cut the tree with my hatchet. Well, that never happened. What
Yeah, I
really
definitely remember
happened?
hearing that story, and that's just such a weird thing to make up. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, like, he was known all this time for, like, being such a noble man, and he could tell no lie. And Georgie just told it how it was. But,
They're
what?
like, all right, look, we need to convince the people that you're honest, so we're gonna make up this story about you being a kid to just tell everybody that you cannot tell a lie and that you're like this honest person. And they come up with the story of like him chopping down a cherry tree, like that's the best thing they could come up with.
Well, it didn't happen while he was alive. This was after he died that this story became a thing. And it's all
Mm,
because
it's even worse.
a you know how, like, when someone dies, everyone, like, wants to make a profit off
Yes.
of it somehow? Well, it was like that with the first president too, because authors would want to be the first ones to write a biography on this famous person. So to make the biography more juicy, this random author just made up this story and it got passed on through history. Ended up falling in love with one woman, but then got engaged to a totally different one. But the woman he fell in love with, her name was Sarah Fairfax, who was George's best friend's wife. The
Wait,
goss.
whoa. George fell in love with his best friend's wife.
Bad, but at least he didn't, like,
At
break
least they
them
didn't
up
like
and
follow
marry.
through on it.
I don't
I wonder
know.
if they ever
He
hooked up. They
probably
definitely
did.
hooked up before.
He probably did.
Yeah,
I
they
read a
could not
lot.
keep it in their pants to save their life.
And then, what? I really hope you didn't read this paragraph yet. But what did you hear that George Washington's teeth is made out of?
I already read it, and
Damn.
so I'm sorry.
Damn.
But I'd
But
never
you
seen
heard
that
it,
before.
right?
No,
Oh,
I'd
you
never heard
haven't?
of that before.
I've heard before that George Washington's teeth are allegedly wooden. Well, allegedly there's something worse. It is known that George suffered from dental problems due to genetics and poor diet, such as literally cracking open coconuts with his teeth or something like that I saw. like being absolutely barbaric. Um, and by the time he was in his 50s, he had just one of his own teeth left. So he went to his dentist and he had dentures made, and like the whole top part of the dentures, or like the base part, was made out of hippopotamus ivory. And then wired into that, the teeth were a mix of slave teeth and cow teeth. And
That's on brand, I guess.
what's really insulting is record shows that he paid slaves 122 shillings, which I had never heard of that before, and I tried to find some kind of equivalent to like today's money, and apparently it equates to 85 cents today. So, for 85 cents, these poor slaves would have to get their teeth ripped out, literally, to put in some guy's mouth.
Holy shit.
That is
I don't know why I
ruthless.
was picturing like dead people, but God
No, these were
bless.
alive.
America was so cursed from day one with all that shit.
If you don't know what bloodletting is, it's what they thought would get rid of the bad blood causing your illness by literally just cutting you and draining your blood. There's no like transfusion part of it. There's no new blood going in. They're just draining you of blood. And by the end of it, he lost 40% of his blood. So therefore, he died.
Wait, that's how George Washington died?
Yes.
Like, I guess I don't know. Like, if somebody walked up to me and was like, Kaylin, do you know how George Washington died? I
Like, you
guess I
probably
wouldn't
only
really
know.
have an answer, but I didn't think it was like that.
I think the only presidents we could answer that to is like Abraham Lincoln and JFK.
Yeah.
That's
R.I.P.
the only ones I know.
I'm sure the other ones just probably passed away peacefully.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably.
He was also known for freeing his slaves in his will. Such a noble thing to do, right? But it didn't go that way exactly. The land, after George died, was left to his wife, Martha, and she wasn't ready to let anyone go except for a few that she was literally scared would just kill her, because what the will actually said was that Martha could do what she wanted with the slaves. So Martha was like, I'm not free. So she just let go of the scary ones and kept on having slaves. And then to make matters worse, once Martha actually did die, the slaves weren't freed. They were separated from their families that they had created amongst themselves and spread out between Martha's kids and grandkids.
I love whenever people's like, we need to return to the old values that this country was founded upon. Like, these are the old values you're talking about.
This was a horrible time. We've really gotten any better as a society. Like, yeah, slavery isn't a thing in all countries, but there's still crazy serial killers and twisted politicians and people making nuclear weapons, so everything's always been shit, moral of the story. That was a rabbit hole for my brain. Alright, what else we got on George? Not only did he say that he was gonna, like, free his slaves when he died, but, like, his whole life, he used legal loopholes to avoid freeing his slaves, even as the states he lived in worked towards abolishing slavery. And in 1780, Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Abolition Act, and this law freed enslaved people after they turned 28 years old and automatically freed any slave who was moved to Pennsylvania for more than 6 months. But Washington, he would have his slaves travel in and out of state, so then that time would restart. He
Dude,
was a
like, what
very
the hell? Like, how's this guy gonna go on about, like, oh, it's right to free the slaves, and then he
Mhm.
is like making them cross borders like once every 6 months to like reset their freedom clock? Like, come on.
found this really funny. His big white hair, that was his like real hair, but he powdered it white and he was actually a ginger. I know. Like the
No shame
women
to the
at the
gingers out
table.
there.
Like imagine going to dinner and the lady is like, I need to go powder my face. And George is just like, yeah, I need to go powder my hair.
You know he did that. Like, those exact words came out of his mouth before.
Talked about him for like near 20 minutes. But, okay, we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson now. Do you know what quote he's famous for by chance?
All men are created equal.
You probably read that off the page, but okay.
I did.
Yes, that is the phrase he is known by, but whew, he'll lie. He'll whole lie. In fact, he grew up on his parents' plantation in Virginia, and he said that his earliest memories are of being carried on a pillow by slaves. Like, I don't know
I
how
don't even know what to say at
people.
this point.
So he married a lady named Martha. It seems like all these guys freaking marry a woman named Martha. And they had 6 kids, but only 2 survived. When Martha was on her deathbed, she asked Thomas to promise her to never remarry so no one else could raise their 2 daughters. And he said yes. Well, Thomas ended up inheriting Martha's dad's property that came with 100 slaves. And in the early part of his political career, Jefferson described the African slave trade as moral depravity and a hideous blot on the country, which it is, but he's one of the very few founders who could be relied upon to push back against the interests of slaveholding Virginians throughout the 1780s. When he was an attorney, Thomas was dedicated to abolishing slavery and took on several cases of slaves seeking freedom, waived his fee. If the slave lost in court, he would give them money to aid in their escape. But in the midst of all of this, he was the founding father that owned the most slaves, having up to 600 at one point.
I swear to God, like, did nobody call them out on this shit back then? Like,
Hell no.
I mean, how are you hiding 600 people? Like,
It only gets worse. Okay, so all of that, like, I want to help abolish slavery, all of that changed when he realized the financial benefit of free enforced labor, and he grew quiet about abolishing slavery around that time. His plantation he owned was called Monticello, and he fashioned the estate into a miniature town entirely run on slave labor. Work included blacksmithing, woodworking, textiles, farming, and more. Its main hub of operations was a nail factory, the profitability of which Jefferson boasted about in numerous letters. He punished child slaves who didn't make enough nails by cutting their food rations, and the plantation's annual grocery bill was around $500, but the nail factory made that amount in a couple of months. Besides its profitability, the nail factory was a breeding ground for child slaves. Jefferson would put enslaved children to work in the factory to determine who did well and deserved extra food rations and who didn't. Those who made 10,000 nails per day received extra privileges, including food, leisure time, and uniforms, while those that made fewer than 5,000 per day were whipped, made to work in rags, and given less to eat. The promising children were apprenticed for skilled labor at 16, and the rest were forced to keep working or moved on to the fields. Imagine making 10,000 nails a day.
I was just not thinking, like, what does it even take to make a nail? Like, that definitely is not an easy thing to make.
needless to say, like, I'm sure these children were around very dangerous things to make nails, unless nails were completely different than the metal nail that I'm thinking currently of, but still, that whole freaking paragraph is just, who does that?
And then at the same time, he's talking about abolishing slavery. Get the
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Thomas's wife Martha, her father was John Wales, and he had multiple kids with one of his slaves named Betty Hemmings. Well, Thomas ended up owning the whole Hemming family after John and Martha died. And Thomas at one point was the minister of France, and he would travel to Paris often, and he would bring a few of the Hemming slaves with him. One of them being like one of the sons of John and Betty, because he was like, Thomas wanted him to come learn how they cook in Paris so that he could go back to America and be Thomas's personal slave chef. That's the only reason these people came with him. And then, following in his father-in-law's footsteps, he began forcing himself on a slave named Sally Hemings, who was the daughter of John Wales and Betty Hemings, aka Martha's half-sister. He started raping, basically. And that started happening when Thomas was 44 and Sally was 14. She basically was like there on this trip as the nanny of his children. But of course, this began a regular occurrence. And after 5 years of Thomas being gross, Sally, unfortunately for her, got pregnant by him. And keep in mind, Sally, Martha, his ex-wife that's dead, half-sisters. So Sally made Thomas promise that when the baby was 18, he would free them. But sadly, the baby died. But Sally went on to have 6 of Thomas's children, 4 of which made it past childhood, and Thomas did keep his promise and free the 4 kids. And that is probably the only half-decent thing he has done.
There's so much to unpack going on right here. All right, first of all, let's start off with the fact that one of our founding fathers and presidents is not only a rapist, but also a pedophile. And then let's also talk about the fact that he was raping his his past wife's half-sister.
Or basically like his half-sister-in-law.
Yeah, that makes it sound even worse.
And
then also the fact that, like, the children that he was giving to this woman were being born into slavery. So, like, his own kids were slaves. And he was keeping them that way until they turned 18.
Yeah.
What freaking dollar bill is he on? Is it the 5? Wait, I'm Googling it.
I just
what
want
bill is Thomas Jefferson on? Oh, he is on the 2.
Presidents. Yeah, George on the $1 bill, Thomas on the $2, Abe on the 5, Andrew Jackson on 20. Funny, I look at that picture all the time and I'm like, who the hell is Andrew Jackson?
Just seriously.
And Ulysses S. Grant is on the 50.
Yo, these are the people that are like on the money that we use every day.
And Hamilton and Ben Franklin are featured on the $10 and $100. Oh,
I can remember hearing. Okay, it makes kind of sense that Hamilton's on. Not like, I'm sure he's a super shitty person. We're going to talk about that, but like he was heavily involved in like the banking system, so it makes sense that he's on money. But like everybody else, why the hell are they on our money? And I remember hearing like somebody call for like them to get taken off years back, and I can remember thinking like, wow, they're being so dramatic right now. But like
I'm
now that you're like looking at this, like that kind of like
pretty
makes sense.
sure.
Like, why are they on our money?
I'm pretty sure Andrew Jackson and that Grant guy were presidents. Yeah, Andrew Jackson, seventh president, and then
Hamilton was never a president though.
neither was Ben Franklin, which feels like a whole ass Mandela effect, but whatever. Let's see, Grant. Were you a president? Yep, he was the 18th. Oh, wow. He looked like a normal dude.
Do we have so many like no-name presidents that nobody remembers? That's probably like a okay thing. 'Cause probably like nothing crazy happened during their presidency.
Fun fact, President Grant led the Union Army to victory in the American Civil War.
Yeah, Ulysses S. Grant.
I'm sure you've got some dirt on you, sir, but we are not here to talk about you today.
I don't know how that rant started off of trying to figure out him and his money, but yeah, Jeffy Boy's really shitty.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about John Adams?
Yes, which is perfect time because John and Tommy Boy were like frenemies. Like they started off like kind of being friends, and then they became like super political partners and hated each other. And they even ran one of like the biggest smear campaigns in the world against each other. And at like one point, Thomas Jefferson was claiming that John Adams was a hermaphrodite.
Oh my
And then
god.
John Adams was claiming that Thomas Jefferson was an atheist, which seems like way less of an accusation than calling him a hermaphrodite. But like, yeah, like they had like some crazy slander campaigns going on back in the day. But let's talk about your boy John Adams. So he was the second president. He actually served as George Washington's vice president. And he was all about unity. He thought getting rid of slavery, though, would mess up things between the North and the South, especially when they needed to fight against the British. So he was not for the abolishing of slavery. But he himself despised slavery and never owned any slaves. In fact, he fought for slaves' freedom on multiple occasions. But he still wasn't against setting them free, so he's still like really shitty for that. So he also had said, and there's a quote where he knew that in history he would be overshadowed by George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and that's like fucking hilarious because nobody knows anything about John Adams. It's definitely true. But he like definitely called that in a quote back in the day. Also, do you remember anything about the Boston Massacre? No, apparently like these British soldiers just like fired upon like American citizens.
Hearing about that in history.
I like remember something about it, but every time I hear Boston Massacre now, I'll think of as like the Boston bombing.
Yeah, that's what I thought you meant, but then I was like, no. Maybe the Boston Tea Party?
But yeah, so apparently like those 5 British soldiers, Jesus, I cannot speak. Those
It's
5
hard to say
British
that.
soldiers fired into the crowd, and somebody had to represent them in court because they were like, yo, we all want to like kill these people right now, but we just set up this whole legal system, so somebody's got to represent these guys. And so John Adams was like, I'm this stand-up guy that believes in the law, so I'll represent y'all. And he ended up getting like a lot of them off of the hook. So like America just like really started hating him after that, which like it was kind of right that he gave them a free trial because like we need to like make sure the law is like there. And he was respected for that like way down the road, but at the time everybody hated him. But he also wanted to call the president like Your Highness, or like you would refer to him as the protector of freedom. And he like came up with all these like crazy titles that he wanted to address the president as, but nobody was trusting of that because we had just broken away from a monarchy. So they were like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that.
Too
So they
soon.
literally, exactly. So they literally settled on Mr. President, which like, I don't know why I thought that was so funny. Like,
which is literally still used today.
Yeah. All right, Mr. President. Like, that's so weird. Can you imagine if we were like protector of freedom, Donald Trump, Your
I was
Highness, Joe
thinking like,
Biden.
oh god. But I was kind of thinking like maybe this is where Trump kind of got his inspiration for being so like combative with the smear campaigns.
Yeah.
Maybe he was looking at good old John and Tom.
So Adams was also not known for his people skills. He was brutally honest, and many people even thought he was obnoxious. And I actually saw like a whole list of quotes from the other founding fathers. I wish I would have copied them down and put them here. But like talking about John Adams and describing him, and every single one of them describes him as being obnoxious. So like this
Oh
was definitely
yeah.
like the aggravating guy in the group that everybody just kind of like tolerated.
Mm.
He was the first president to live in the White House, which seems like an honor, but it was actually kind of shitty at the time. Like the entire thing like smelled like plaster. There was like barely any furniture in there. So he was kind of like the trial run for the White House. And then what is also crazy is so like Tim and Thomas Jefferson had this big smear campaign frenemies thing. They ended up dying on the same exact day on July 4th, 1826.
That is crazy.
50 years down to the day after when like the Declaration of Independence was signed. They both died on that same day, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Like that is wild, right? Something weird's happening there.
Mhm. I want to know how they died. Like, how do
And
we not
apparently
know still?
yeah, apparently when Adams was dying, he like said like, "Oh, Thomas Jefferson outlived me" or something crazy like that, but Thomas Jefferson had actually passed away like a couple minutes before him, so he like won, I guess.
Oh my god. He didn't win anything.
Oh, and also for everybody that's like freaking out about like I don't know, all the music videos with, like the Satan stuff in it. Adams, which was like the first person to live in the White House, actually had a dog named Satan that lived with him in the White House.
What do you mean all the videos with Satan?
Like,
Am I
like all the
missing
music
something?
videos and stuff they're coming out with, and like people are like,
Oh.
oh, like let's cancel all these celebrities because they had Satan in it. Well, like literally the president's dog was named Satan.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
Not
I thought
supporting all
there
the
was
Satan
some
in the
kind
music
of
video
like
stuff, like that's definitely weird, but like let's also why were these people so fucking weird?
So he did this thing he called air bathing, where he would literally sit. Wait, where is my little? Okay. He would walk around like, I guess, was he? No, he was never president. So he wasn't walking around the White House. He was just walking around his own house, nude, and he would like sit in his chair in front of his big open window that's like ground level. Anyone walking past can see in this guy's big old window, and he's just sitting there naked. And that's how he cleansed himself. So he probably smelled horrible because air bathing does not bathe you.
I mean, I know like the feeling of like kind of like worked up some sweat and like just want to like air out a little bit and like but like
No, but this
you do
was
that like
literally his
just like
bathing.
real fast, like yeah, like that's disgusting. Then you go take a shower, like you know. Dude, Ben Franklin reminds me of the type of guy to do some shit like that, though.
Yeah, he was a weird one. Also, the story of him flying a kite with a key and then like lightning striking it and him discovering electricity, that's also fake. He would have been fried, according to researchers, and electricity had already been discovered. Because as we are finding out more and more these days, the people on this planet have known about electricity for centuries. So
Also, he
that was
just
fake.
bummed off of Nikola Tesla's everything.
Hmm. Like back in school, I would hear all these names and I could never like remember them. But like now that I'm older and I hear all these names, like it's so interesting to like actually connect the dots 20 years later. Because who expects someone that's 10 years old to just have to memorize all these names and what they were famous for?
Yeah. Also, like, why do we Let me not even start that conversation. I understand why we have history.
So, one, we already kind of talked about. He was never president. Even though, like, Ben Franklin just sounds like one of those president names, it blows my mind that he was never president. But he did sign, like, the Declaration of Independence and all that. And also, his son was his prisoner. And basically, he caused the Boston Tea Party. He's a great guy. So, prior to the American Revolution, he lived in London as head of the Pennsylvania delegation to England, and he traveled far and wide, at one point staying away for over a decade. Much of that time was spent at 36 Craven Street, still standing in London as the Benjamin Franklin House. With his intellect and charm, Franklin had no problem making connections in British society and politics. He also had been praised for his scientific interests and resulted in a slew of well-known inventions like bifocals, and that's all I can remember off the top of my head.
What the hell do bifocals even do? Like, every time I think of them, all I think of is what's that show? National Treasure.
Oh.
You know, they get his pair of bifocals and they have to like use it to like decode the.
Yeah, sure.
You really not seen that?
I don't think so.
Great show. Anyway, continue.
Oh, wait, no. His curiosity may have had a dark side because in 1998, workers began the long process of conserving the history of 36 Craven Street. And while excavating what had been the garden, the team made a shocking discovery. The bones of more than 15 people were buried underneath. And 6 of these individuals were children. There were skulls, arms, and leg bones that were all discovered at the site. Even more alarming was confirmation that the bones date from Franklin's time there. They also showed clear evidence of dissection, but the evidence does not point entirely to Franklin. I remember actually, my last semester of college, I took the history of biology, and we had to watch this whole documentary about Ben Franklin's house that all these bones were discovered in. And it so happens that I don't remember, because from these sources that I used for my notes, it says that the human remains were probably connected to an underground anatomy school led by William Hewson, a young doctor and Franklin's friend and protege, and that during that time, anatomy was still a practice in its infancy, and society frowned upon the study, and early anatomists, is that how you say that? Anatomists? They had to turn to grave robbing, which was illegal. So, I don't remember if this guy's name was William Hewson from the documentary. I'm sure it very well could have been. But they were like living in this house together, and at this time, like, it was like all the rage to learn everything you could about the human body because so little had been known back then. And the only way to do that is to see what's inside of a human body. And you can't just like take a living human body and be like, let me see what's inside of you. So they had to like grave rob. And what probably happened was this man that Benjamin Franklin was living with was in like anatomy school or something, or maybe he was like one of the leaders of this anatomy boom, but he was using the basement to dissect and then learn about the body. I remember from the documentary that like there were also animal bones down there because people were also really interested with what's inside of animals too. So, I don't know. It is a dark thing, but in my weird head, like, that's not that dark because they were just trying to learn about science.
Yeah, I like understand that. I wonder how many people like blamed their like murders on anatomy. Like they get caught like, the body open. I'm so sorry. I'm actually just an anatomist. But I'm misunderstood.
Well, these days, there better not be nobody trying to pull that card.
Also, I'm just going to
But
choose
back
to
then-
believe that Ben Franklin was like a mass murderer because that seems pretty on brand for all the other stuff. We already have a pedophile and a rapist. Might as well throw the murderer in there.
I don't think it was really him. I don't
I just
get
want to be
that
ignorant.
vibe. I know. Also, oh, this is this is funny. Deborah, who his let me start that over. His wife's name was Deborah, and they were married for 44 years, and there is no way that this woman did not know that her husband was quite the skirt chaser. Franklin often acknowledged his strong desires and was even scared of them. The pure force of his libido was such that it brought him into contact with quote-unquote low women and other bad company. When
What is
he
a
was
low
young,
woman?
not wealthy, not prestigious, not
Oh,
of,
okay.
you know. When he was young, he was apparently quite the hellraiser when he visited London in 1725. Even as he grew older, his reputation for wooing the ladies followed him. During his post-revolution time in Europe, a popular verse said that he is too ready to engage when younger arms invite him. The smoking gun of this story has to be a letter that Franklin's family and associates tried to suppress for centuries, but it came out. And it was written in 1745, titled Advice to a Young Man on the Choice of a Mistress. And that was kept secret until 1926. In the letter, Franklin addresses a friend on the need for caution when selecting a mistress. He said, "You should prefer old women to young ones, because they are generally more interesting people and rarely have the pesky side effects of producing illegitimate children."
Dude, what the hell were the founders of our country? This
They
dude's so
were-
afraid of his own like sex drive. He's like, dude, I just can't control it. I'm literally like I'm about to take this to
And
R-rated on the podcast real fast there, but Jesus Christ, Ben Franklin.
yeah. And like him telling his little friends that they should go after older women because they can't. And all of this is like women to like cheat on your wife with, but like
Yeah, your
go cheat
mistress.
on your wife with an old lady because they are smarter and they're too old to give you a child, so no one will know. Oh, also, Franklin may have been in attendance at meetings of the infamous Hellfire Club, which was a gentleman's club that had been the subject of a lot of scandalous rumors. And according to the Hellfire Clubs, there isn't much to the tales of these claims, but it's been said that there were like satanic rituals, secret societies, orgies, all of that going on in the Hellfire Club. Yeah. And there were probably some really horrible things that for real happened there because it's supposedly really freaking haunted today. I watched a Sam and Colby video about it. And that's all on. I forgot who we were talking about for a second. On Benny Boy. And since I mentioned secret societies, I just want to drop the fact that so many of these founding fathers were Freemasons, like Benjamin Franklin, James Monroe, George Washington. Yeah. I was trying to see if I could find any deeper of a connection, and I saw some things about like the obelisks and how the Washington Monument is an obelisk, but that's really all I could find.
Yeah, I've seen stuff about the obelisks before too. All right,
Alright.
y'all. We're about to run out of time, so we're about to speed run through Alexander Hamilton here. But it's okay because I really don't have that much stuff on him anyway. But he started the New York Post, which is still around today. That's kind of crazy that a guy like way back then, like imagine if you work for the New York Post, you can tell people like Alexander Hamilton started this company. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I guess we'll start off with how old boy died. So he was dissing this other dude named Aaron Burr, which is already wild because they used to like be friends and they even had partnered to work on like some work cases together doing like legal work. Well, he kept like dissing Aaron Burr, and this dude got so pissed off that he literally challenges Hamilton to a duel. Like the type where like you actually use guns and kill each other, which apparently was very common back then. Like that's how people settled their issues. And they literally go out and Burr just shoots and kills Hamilton and he dies in the duel. And to make things even wilder, like just a couple years before that, Hamilton's own son had died in a duel. It's like he knew like how dangerous and dumb this was, and he died the same way. Like, dude, they were savage back then.
Yeah. I've never all this talk about like that Hamilton Broadway show, like I have never seen it. I have no desire to see it. People tell me it's great, and I just could
I
care
kind of do want to
less.
see it actually. After researching for him, everybody kept like referencing it. They're like, he's the only president that has a whole musical made after him. I was like, oh damn, now I kind of want to watch it.
Bro, I feel like so many more presidents probably have juicier lives than that, but
Probably so, but I also heard the musical's like really funny.
I'm sure it's the most PG one they could make, maybe.
No, I think it's like very vulgar.
Oh,
Like I think it's meant for older audiences.
well,
I could be completely wrong, and maybe it's just like a nice little documentary musical about his life, but I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm pretty sure it's like a comedy.
no. I have no idea. I probably never will because I probably never will watch it.
But his love life was also basically a comedy because he was far from loyal. He straight up cheated on his own wife with a married woman. And when the town find out, he literally had to like write a long ass letter apologizing and also promising people like he would never run for president, basically in turn for their forgiveness.
Hmm.
Can you
I
imagine
feel
like
like
getting caught cheating and having to like address the entire like town and nation basically and be like, I am so sorry for this. Like that's rough.
I mean, these celebrities out here clowning do it almost every other day.
Yeah, true. But I feel like now people just cheat on each other and everybody's like that's shitty of you, but whatever. But like I feel like back then it was like incredibly immoral and like horrible, and which it still is. But
Yeah, if anyone found out, but if he was just talking to his little buddies about it, they'd be like, oh yeah. Well, on that note, that is all the dirt we could dig up on our founding fathers for you today. I hope you learned something new. I hope you hate them a little more.
yeah, guys, I'm feeling really proud to be an American now. We've gotten better. We've gotten a lot.
Dude, okay, y'all. If you want more of us till you come back in 2 weeks with the next episode, you can head over to our TikTok. You can go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. And we have a website, www.southernwoke.com. Go check it out.
All right, y'all, and we will see y'all in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.